Picture this. You sign a contract to marry a billionaire nearly 3 times your age to save your sick mother from eviction. It's a business deal, cold and simple. But then, in a moment of intoxicated weakness and mistaken identity, you end up sleeping with the one person who can destroy everything. His ruthless, estranged, and dangerously attractive son. And 2 months later, just as the wedding invitations to the father are being mailed out, you realize you're pregnant. And the math? The math is definitely not pointing to the fiancé. Today we are diving deep into the scandal that brought the Sterling Empire to its knees. The story begins in the grim gray outskirts of Chicago, far away from the glitz of the Gold Coast where the Sterlings reside. We meet Elena, a 23-year-old brilliant architecture student who had to drop out because life decided to throw her a massive curveball. Her father had passed away, leaving insurmountable gambling debts, and her mother was battling a rare autoimmune disease that required treatments costing more than a luxury car every single month. Elena was working 3 jobs, barista by day, telemarketer by evening, and cleaning offices by night, but the interest on the loan shark's debt was compounding faster than she could print receipts. She was desperate. And when I say desperate, I don't mean I need a vacation desperate. I mean she was eyeing the dark waters of the Chicago River and wondering if jumping was easier than facing the eviction notice taped to her door. It is crucial to understand this level of desperation because it explains why a smart, capable woman would agree to sell her life away to a man she didn't love. Enter Marcus Sterling, 65 years old, a titan of industry, and a man whose heart was rumored to be made of the same crude oil he drilled from the earth. Marcus didn't want a wife. He wanted a merger. He needed a respectable young fertile woman on his arm to soften his image for a Senate run he was secretly planning. His PR team had scouted Elena. She was pretty but modest, intelligent but poor enough to be controlled. They met in a glass-walled office that felt more like an interrogation room than a dating venue. Marcus slid a contract across the mahogany desk. It promised to wipe out her father's debt, pay for the best specialists for her mother, and provide her with a monthly allowance that made her head spin. The catch? 5 years of marriage. An heir within the first 2. And an NDA so thick it could stop a bullet. Elena looked at the contract, thought of her mother coughing in their freezing apartment, and signed her name in black ink. She had just sold her soul, but at least her mother would live. But every gothic horror story needs a villain who is paradoxically the most interesting person in the room, and that role belongs to Julian Sterling. Julian was 32, the estranged son of Marcus, and the current CEO of the family's rival tech division. If Marcus was the old-school tyrant, Julian was the modern-day predator, ruthless, calculating, and possessing a smile that could freeze water. He hated his father with a passion that burned brighter than the sun. Julian saw this engagement for what it was, a pathetic attempt by his father to rebrand himself. When news of the engagement broke, Julian made it his personal mission to investigate this Elena girl. He was convinced she was a gold digger, a snake in the grass who was manipulating his senile father. He didn't know about the debt or the sick mother. All he saw was a young woman securing a bag, and Julian Sterling did not like sharing the family fortune. The friction began at the engagement gala, a masquerade ball hosted at the Sterling estate, a mansion that looked like it was designed to intimidate rather than shelter. Elena was there, draped in silk and diamonds that didn't belong to her, feeling like an imposter in her own life. She was wearing a mask, hiding her terror behind feathers and sequins. Marcus was busy schmoozing with senators, leaving Elena alone in a sea of sharks. She retreated to the library, seeking a moment of silence, desperate to breathe. The room was dark, smelling of old paper and whiskey. That's when she found him. Julian was there, also hiding from the festivities, nursing a glass of scotch. He was wearing a mask too. Neither immediately recognized the other in the dim light. To Elena, he was just a stranger with intense eyes and a voice that sounded like velvet dragged over gravel. To Julian, she was just a mysterious woman clearly unhappy to be at the party of the year. The conversation that followed was electric, charged with the kind of raw honesty you only share with strangers you think you'll never see again. Elena, fueled by 2 glasses of champagne on an empty stomach, lamented about being trapped in a cage of gold. Julian, cynical and dark, laughed and told her that cages were comfortable if you knew how to bite the hand that feeds you. They bonded over their mutual hatred of the sterling pretension, not realizing they were talking about the same people. The chemistry wasn't just a spark. It was a forest fire. One thing led to another. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated madness. For Elena, it was an escape from her reality. For Julian, it was just taking what he wanted. They spent the night together in the guest wing, hidden away from the world. It was passionate, aggressive, and completely anonymous. Elena left before dawn, filled with shame but also a strange sense of aliveness she hadn't felt in years. The next morning was the cold shower of reality. Elena was summoned to breakfast to officially meet the family. She walked into the dining room, her legs still shaking from the night before, only to freeze in horror. Sitting at the right hand of Marcus Sterling was the stranger from the library, Julian. The mask was off, but the smirk was the same. The blood drained from Elena's face so fast she nearly fainted. Julian's reaction was even more terrifying. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second, recognition flickering, before settling into a look of absolute icy disgust. He realized he had just slept with his father's fiancé, the gold digger, the enemy. The silence at that table was heavy enough to crush bones. Marcus, oblivious to the nuclear tension radiating between his son and his future bride, simply introduced them. Elena, this is my disappointment of a son, Julian. Julian, meet your future stepmother. The weeks that followed were a psychological torture chamber for Elena. She had to move into the Sterling estate to prepare for the wedding, which meant living under the same roof as Julian. Julian began a campaign of terror. He didn't reveal their secret. Mutually assured destruction prevented that, but he tormented her in every other way. He would corner her in hallways, whispering cruel insults about her price tag. How much was it, Elena? Did the old man pay up front? He was convinced she had seduced him on purpose to gain leverage. He didn't believe it was a mistake. He thought she was a master manipulator, and ironically, his hatred was fueled by the fact that he couldn't stop thinking about her. He was obsessed with the woman he was supposed to hate. Elena, meanwhile, was trying to survive. She took his insults with her head held high, knowing that one slip-up would leave her mother on the street. But biology, my friends, does not care about your contracts or your family feuds. About 6 weeks after the masquerade ball, Elena started feeling off. It started with fatigue, then came the nausea. She dismissed it as stress. I mean, who wouldn't be nauseous living in a house where the son looks at you like he wants to kill you or kiss you, and the father treats you like a potted plant? But when she fainted during a dress fitting, her handler, a stern woman named Mrs. Higgins, insisted on a doctor. Elena bought a drugstore test in secret, hiding it in her purse like contraband. She took it in the guest bathroom at 3 a.m., shaking so hard she dropped the box. The 2 lines appeared almost instantly. Positive. She was pregnant. And considering she hadn't even held hands with Marcus yet, let alone consummated anything, there was only one mathematical possibility. She was carrying Julian Sterling's baby. The panic that set in was primal. This wasn't just a scandal, this was a death sentence. If Marcus found out she was pregnant with another man's child, the contract would be void. Her mother's medical bills would stop. They would be sued for fraud. And if he found out it was Julian's child, Marcus would go nuclear. He would destroy Julian, destroy Elena, and probably burn the house down for good measure. Elena sat on the bathroom floor, staring at the stick, realizing the chaos she had unleashed. She had to get rid of it or run away. But she couldn't run. The debt collectors were still lurking. And her mother was in the middle of a delicate treatment cycle. She was trapped. She decided she had to tell Julian. He was a monster, yes, but he was the father. Maybe, just maybe, he would help her hide it or pay her off to leave. She confronted Julian in his home office late one rainy Tuesday. He was reviewing stocks, looking particularly ruthless, when she slammed the pregnancy test onto his desk. "We have a problem," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. Julian looked at the stick, then at her, then back at the stick. For the first time in his life, the arrogance vanished. He did the math immediately. "You're lying," he hissed, standing up. "You're trying to trap me." Elena laughed, a dry, hysterical sound. Trap you? Julian, this ruins me. This destroys everything I'm trying to save. I don't want you. I don't want this. But I need to know what you're going to do. Julian paced the room like a caged tiger. This changed the game. A sterling heir. His heir. But born to his father's wife? It was Greek tragedy levels of messed up. Julian's ruthless pragmatism kicked in. Get an abortion, he said coldly. I'll pay for it. I'll pay double. Go to Switzerland. Say it's a spa trip. Elena felt a tear slide down her cheek. I can't, she whispered. Despite the chaos, despite the poverty, the idea of a child, a piece of her that wasn't owned by debt, sparked something in her. Plus, her mother's Catholic guilt was hardwired into her DNA. Then what? Julian roared. You think you can pass it off as my father's? He's been impotent for a decade, Elena. Why do you think he needed a contract? The revelation hit Elena like a freight train. Marcus couldn't have children. There was no way to pass this baby off as the legitimate heir. The secret had an expiration date of about 9 months, or whenever she started showing. They formed an uneasy, toxic alliance. They had to buy time. Julian, for reasons he couldn't quite articulate, decided he wasn't going to let his father win. If Marcus found out, he would destroy Elena, and Julian, surprisingly, found that he didn't want that. Maybe it was possession, maybe it was the lingering heat of that night, but he felt territorial over the child. We continue as normal, Julian commanded. The wedding is in 3 weeks. We get you married. Once you're legally a sterling, you have protections. Then, we figure out a way to divorce him and take the money. It was a crazy plan. Marry the father while pregnant with the son's baby, solely to secure the bag? It was diabolical. Elena agreed because she saw no other option. The wedding prep escalated into madness. Elena was suffering from severe morning sickness, which she blamed on wedding jitters and food poisoning. She was losing weight, looking pale and ghostly, which ironically made her look more like the waifish aristocratic bride Marcus wanted. Julian was hovering constantly, acting the part of the concerned stepson, which raised eyebrows among the staff. The tension between them was morphing. The hatred was softening into a shared panic. And under the panic, the attraction was re-emerging. They were co-conspirators in a high-stakes heist. Late at night, they would meet to strategize. And those meetings were fraught with a magnetic pull they tried to ignore. Julian started bringing her ginger tea and crackers. He started asking about her mother. The monster was showing cracks. But secrets in the Sterling house have a way of leaking out. Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper who had eyes like a hawk and ears like a bat, noticed the signs. She saw the nausea. She saw the clandestine meetings with Julian. She saw the way Julian looked at Elena's stomach when he thought no one was looking. Mrs. Higgins was loyal to Marcus, and she smelled a rat. She began snooping. She found the receipt for the pregnancy test in the trash. Elena had been careless in her panic. She didn't confront them yet. She held on to the information, waiting for the moment of maximum impact. She was the Alfred Hitchcock of housekeeping, building the suspense until the perfect moment. The wedding day arrived. A lavish affair at a cathedral, followed by a reception at the estate. The paparazzi were everywhere. Elena felt like she was walking to her execution. She stood at the altar, Marcus holding her hand with his cold, dry grip. The priest droned on about faithfulness and truth. Elena felt bile rising in her throat. She looked into the crowd and saw Julian in the front row looking pale, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle was twitching. He gave her a barely perceptible nod. Keep going, she said. I do. She signed the register. She was officially Mrs. Marcus Sterling. The plan was working. Until the reception dinner. The dinner was a black-tie disaster waiting to happen. Speeches were made. Champagne flowed. Marcus stood up to give a toast to his beautiful young bride. He was smug victorious. He had his trophy. Then Mrs. Higgins walked up to the head table. She whispered something in Marcus's ear and placed a small, crumpled piece of paper on the table. The receipt. Marcus's face went from flushed to ash-white in seconds. He looked at the paper, then at Elena's untouched champagne, then at her stomach. The room went silent as Marcus tapped his glass with a fork, the sound ringing out like a gunshot. "It seems," Marcus announced, his voice trembling with a terrifying quiet rage, "that my new wife has a secret. Mrs. Higgins tells me we are expecting an addition to the family." Polite applause started but quickly died down when they saw Marcus's face. "The miracle of science," Marcus sneered. "Considering we have never been intimate." The silence now was absolute. You could hear a pin drop in the next county. Marcus turned to Elena, his eyes full of hate. "Who is it? Which one of the staff? Or was it your debt collector?" Elena was frozen, tears streaming down her face. She was done. It was over. But then, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. Julian stood up. He didn't look scared. He looked ready for war. He walked up to the head table, took the microphone from his father's hand, and looked the old man dead in the eye. "It's mine," Julian said. The chaos that erupted was instantaneous. Guests were screaming, cameras were flashing, and Marcus looked like he was having a stroke. "You." Marcus choked out. "You? And her?" Julian didn't flinch. "Yes. And since she is your wife and I am your son, and that baby is the blood heir you've been desperate for, I'd say you're in a very complicated position, father." Julian grabbed Elena's hand. "We're leaving." It was the ultimate power move. He wasn't just claiming the baby. He was humiliating his father on a global stage. He was taking the one thing Marcus had just bought. They retreated to Julian's penthouse in the city, leaving the Sterling estate in flames, metaphorically, though Marcus was probably throwing lamps. The fallout was immediate. Lawyers were called. The press went wild. The Sterling soap opera, the headlines screamed. Elena was terrified. She was married to the father but living with the son, pregnant with the grandson. It was a legal nightmare. But in the quiet of the penthouse, away from the madness, the dynamic shifted. Julian wasn't the monster anymore. He had blown up his life to save her. "Why?" she asked him that night. "You could have denied it. You could have let him destroy me." Julian looked at her, really looked at her, and placed a hand on her stomach. "Because I realized I hate him more than I hate losing money. And I don't want my kid raised by that tyrant." The following months were a blur of legal battles. Marcus tried to annul the marriage, sue for fraud, and disinherit Julian. But Julian was smarter. He had been building a case against his father's illegal business dealings for years. An insurance policy he never thought he'd use. He used Elena's position as the wife to gain access to files Marcus kept in the home safe. They worked together, Elena using her knowledge of the house, Julian using his corporate shark instincts. They were a team. A messy, chaotic, hormonally charged team. And as Elena's belly grew, so did Julian's attachment. He went to ultrasounds. He read books. He was still ruthless to the world, but to her he was becoming human. But the climax of our story isn't a courtroom. It's the delivery room. Elena went into labor 3 weeks early, stress-induced, of course. Marcus, discovering their plan to expose his embezzlement, decided to play dirty. He froze Julian's accounts. He sent private security to the hospital to try and take custody of the child the moment it was born, claiming Julian was unfit and Elena was a breach of contract surrogate. The audacity of this man knew no bounds. Julian was blocked by security guards in the lobby, while Elena was screaming in labor upstairs. It was chaos. Julian, displaying true action movie energy, physically fought his way past 2 guards, took a punch to the jaw, and sprinted up 7 flights of stairs because the elevators were locked down. He burst into the delivery room just as the baby was crowning. Sweaty, bruised, and looking like a maniac, he held Elena's hand. "I'm here," he gasped. "I'm not letting him take this kid." Elena, in between contractions, looked at him and realized that somewhere along the line, the hate had turned into love. Not the sweet fairy tale love, but a forged in fire, ride or die kind of love. They welcomed a baby boy, a screaming, healthy heir. But the guards were outside the door. Marcus had obtained an emergency court order for temporary custody, citing Julian's violent outburst in the lobby. This is where Elena, the poor girl from the outskirts, showed her steel. She asked for the hospital notary. She looked at Julian. "The contract," she said. "It says if I produce an heir within 2 years, I get 50% of the voting shares of the company as a trust for the child." Julian's eyes widened. She was right. The contract didn't specify the heir had to be Marcus's biological child, just a legal heir born of the marriage. Since they were still legally married, and Julian was the biological father, the child was technically and legally the ultimate sterling heir. "Sign the birth certificate," she told Julian. "Acknowledge paternity. It locks Marcus out." They played the ultimate loophole card by acknowledging Julian as the father, but with Elena being the legal wife of the head of house, the baby became the bridge between the two warring factions, protected by the very contract Marcus wrote to trap her. Marcus arrived at the hospital room, smug and ready to take the baby. Elena simply handed him a copy of the birth certificate and the original prenup, highlighted in yellow. "Congratulations, Grandpa," Julian said, wiping blood from his lip. "You got your heir. And per your contract, Elena now controls the board on his behalf until he's 18, which means she's your boss." The look on Marcus's face was worth every second of misery. He had been outplayed by the gold digger and the disappointment. He stormed out, defeated by his own legal jargon. The aftermath was messy. Divorces, restructuring, tabloids, but the power dynamic had shifted forever. Elena filed for divorce from Marcus the next day, retaining her shares and her dignity. She didn't stay with Julian immediately. They had too much baggage to unpack. She moved into her own place, paid off her mother's debts, and focused on raising her son Leo. But don't worry, romance fans. Julian wasn't giving up that easily. He stepped down as CEO of the rival division and started showing up at Elena's new house. Not with contracts or threats, but with coffee and diapers, and eventually, a ring that he paid for with his own money. It took 2 years of courting, real courting this time, before Elena agreed to a date. They were the most scandalous couple in Chicago history. The woman who married the father had a baby by the son and took over the empire. In the end, the Sterling family chaos settled into a strange new normal. Marcus retired to a private island, bitter and alone with his money. Julian and Elena took over the Sterling Foundation, turning it into something that actually helped people like Elena's family. They eventually got married in a small private ceremony. No masks, no contracts, no secrets. Just them and their son. It was a chaotic road to get there, paved with bad decisions and ruthless ambition, but they proved that sometimes the biggest disasters lead to the best destinations. So what is the lesson here? Never sign a contract you haven't read. Never underestimate the quiet girl in the corner. And definitely, absolutely, never sleep with your fiancé's son, unless you are prepared to overthrow an entire corporate empire. It's a story of desperation turning into domination. Elena went in as a pawn and came out the queen. And Julian? He learned that the only thing worth more than the family fortune was the family he chose to fight for. And that, my friends, is the tea on the Sterling saga. The tabloids still talk about it. They call Elena the billion-dollar mom. But to Julian, she's just the only woman who ever saw him clearly. It's messy, it's toxic, and it's surprisingly heartwarming in a twisted way. But hey, rich people problems, am I right? If you enjoyed this roller coaster of stress and scandal, make sure you hit that like button so hard you break your screen. I want to know in the comments, what would you have done in Elena's position? Would you have run away? Or would you have stayed and fought for the throne? Let me know down below. Until next time, keep your friends close, your enemies closer, and your prenups ironclad. Stay chaotic, everyone.